our questions here. I'm here with Kevin Beck from Lenovo. This is Avram Piltch over here, and we are talking about ThinkPads. So, Kevin, can you tell the folks what your job title is at Lenovo and what you do?
Sure. My official job title is Senior Competitive Analyst, and I'm in our slightly newly renamed PC and Smart Devices group, which essentially covers all of the Think products, and then in functions that I'm not directly involved with, but it's all of our PC related products. So as you might divine from the job title, part of my responsibilities are to look at ThinkPads in the market, or look at the market for other things. And the simplest way I can put it is, of all the things that we can choose to talk about around ThinkPads, I look at how we are most clearly differentiated in the market. And as I'm sure we'll talk about over the next hour, a large part of that, I believe, having done this for years, is the way that we design them. Our fundamental philosophy and our fundamental method of engineering and the things that we specifically target every ThinkPad to be, that's a large part of what I do, is evangelize and help with the marketing of ThinkPads around the world.
Wow, great. So I guess one question I want to start off with before we look at some of the questions that have come in,
right,
is how is it that you help customers, or what would your advice be to someone when they ask which ThinkPad is right for me, which ThinkPad is right for my business? There are so many models out there. It's a pretty broad lineup. How do you help them decide?
Well, sometimes if we're in a jovial mood with customers, I'll joke and say, agreed, the world would be a whole lot easier if we only had to make one ThinkPad. Right? Obviously, that's no longer the case. So even if you go back in time and look at what was in the market from us and from other folks, you'd say 10 years ago, I don't know the exact number, but we probably had 8 to 10 different models of ThinkPad 10 years ago. But if you look at all the sort of technology trends and things that have come about relative to IT organizations and end users' desires, you've still got folks who need things like the P series, who need the absolute the horsepower and the video processing, the discrete graphics, down to the thinnest and lightest things like the X1 Carbon. And then you've got yoga convertibles and 2-in-1s like the X1 tablet. So when I sit down and first start having this conversation with a salesperson, and I'm there to talk to the customer about it, we start by figuring out what their needs are, right? There's a certain matrix, if you will, that most customers arrive at of what their desire is for thinness and lightness, right? Are these going to be carried by salespeople in the field? Are they going to be carried by executives? Do they need the absolute end game in terms of processing horsepower? What's their memory requirements? And obviously, we pretty much have a product line that covers all those needs. So that's usually where we start, is what are their needs? And then you get into, again, things like desires, because thinness and lightness obviously cost more money, right? The technological enablement, or the technology features that are included in the very thinnest and lightest laptops, sometimes don't differ significantly, from, say, like a T460 or something like that, right? But there are people in the world who need something thinner and lighter. So that's usually where we start, is just looking at helping the customer build a clear definition of what they need and what their budget is. And then we start going through and narrowing down which ones might be the right product for them.
So I have a question from our chat room, which is, what's the best-selling ThinkPad, or the one most people are talking about this year?
That really kind of two different questions. And I don't actually know off the top of my head our sales numbers, but generally, year on year, since we renamed the systems back in 2000, I think, when we moved away from the old like 600 and 500 naming to what at the time were the T and X have still survived, and there were others that have changed over time. T series, and take it as a whole, I couldn't tell you which model within the T series, but T series has historically been our best-selling line within the ThinkPad sub-series, essentially since we started T series. Now, as far as what most people are talking about, I think for this year, since we've kind of aggregated the X1 line with the X1 Carbon, X1 Tablet, X1 Yoga, that's gotten a lot of press for us because what we wanted to do was kind of take the top of the line, the best ultimate expression of what ThinkPad could be, at least in terms of thinness and lightness and mobility, and also productivity and all the other things we look at. That's probably gotten the most press for us. Then I could also make a case to say the T460S, right? We've got something now in a mainstream T series with all the things that enterprise and corporate users care about, like conventional bottom docking, vPro, all these other things that go into decisions around an enterprise class laptop. And it's, if I'm not mistaken, basically as thin as the first generation of X1 Carbon was 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting actually. If anyone wants to take a quick look, I don't know if you have them. I have a couple over here on my left. I have, let's see.
This is a T460S here.
I have the X1 Carbon, and I can put the T460XS next to it, so we can actually have a little. Which one? No, this is the 460. This is the 460S. So I'm just going to switch camera position for folks so they can sort of see what I'm seeing. For a sec.
Yeah,
okay, so what I have here is the one on the one in my hand now is the T460S, and the one on the table is the X1 Carbon. And if I can put them next to each other, you'll see that it's very, very close to being the current X1 Carbon all by itself. And you're right, it's the thickness of the old it's pretty much the thickness of the old X1 Carbon. Kind of stack them on top. Obviously, as you know, X1 while T460, while the T400S series has gotten lighter, so has the Carbon, and now you've got the Carbon is down to without the touch, with the I think the regular screen is 2.6 pounds versus 3 pounds on this,
right,
on the 460S, and I can really, hey, they're both good, but I can really tell the difference. The Carbon is even lighter. I think that's a decision. I mean, I know some folks on the Reddit forum have asked about is like, hey, which of these should I get, the 460S or the Carbon, or the X1 Carbon? My take on it is, I mean, I think price wise they're pretty close right now. I like the Carbon. I like the Carbon better because you get a better screen, and you get a slightly more colorful screen, and it's lighter. But how do you usually help folks make that decision?
Well, there are things about the T that when it comes to enterprise customers, and to back up a second, that's a large part of the rationale that goes into the breadth of the portfolio, is because obviously we're trying to meet the needs of a massive number of true enterprise users who are buying these things by the thousands and the tens of thousands and rolling them out, but also meet the individual needs of each individual user. So there are some things, most notably the traditional bottom docking that's compatible with the other T series in the T460S that makes the biggest difference to a lot of corporate users, right? But if that's not a concern, and ultimate thinness and lightness, if you're a road warrior and that 0.4 of a pound in your bag is what is going to make the difference to you and mean something in carrying it around in your daily work life, then probably the X1 Carbon is the right choice. But technologically, they're roughly equivalent to one of the latest gen processors. Memory capacity is a little different, right? T460S, if I'm not mistaken, will go up to 24 gigs, whereas the X1 Carbon is 16.
Yep.
There are a few differences.
The 460S is serviceable too. So for IT departments, I think if they want to get in there and mess with that, they can. Whereas once you get the RAM on the X1 Carbon, that's it.
Right.
But so totally, totally understand the differences between the two. Also, I don't know if it's true in other markets, but I think right now in the U.S. you can only get touchscreen. You can't get touchscreen on the Carbon.
Correct.
Correct. Now, our position at Laptop, take it for what it's worth. It's just our
Yeah.
take is we like them without a touchscreen anyway, because we find that there's a little bit of a battery life penalty from having touch, and so if you're not having a 2-in-1, we just as soon not have touch. So we're getting another question about. I think a lot of people asked about this, so I have one over here. I don't know if you have one as well about the Yoga, the P40 Yoga. What we just got, you guys just sent this to us, so we haven't got a chance to play with it a lot yet. This is I guess this is special because it offers a level of performance that we haven't seen in other 2-in-1s. What's specifically special about it, and what was the rationale behind creating a 2-in-1 with this kind of horsepower?
Okay, so obviously, I think everyone's aware that we transitioned the naming from the old W series, which was our traditional workstation series for ThinkPad, to P, which brought it in line with our desktop naming scheme for our professional workstations. And as we looked at the portfolio, the more traditional clamshell 15 and 17s are what you find across the industry and from us in professional workstations. And when we piloted the idea, to be just completely open, we piloted the idea of having a convertible Yoga type product in a professional workstation class with that targeted set of customers who buy professional workstations. It was just a resounding yes. And that was basically the rationale, is that what professional workstations get used for does vary. You've got some people who are purely interested in the raw computational and video processing horsepower. So, when you look at things like the P50 and the P70 with the graphics and the higher end processors are available, for the pure raw processing people, that's going to be their thing. But there's obviously a lot of people in the professional workstation space who are using it for creative type stuff, for video production, for video, photo and video editing. And this really, in the feedback we got from our customer advisory councils, appealed to them. So the key thing for a lot of workstation customers is not just that it has discrete graphics. It's that we work with the suppliers of a very large number. I don't know the exact number, but a large number of ISVs, of independent software vendors. So the classes of software that are typically used by professional workstation users, I mean, you're talking in some cases pieces of software that range from tens of thousands of dollars a seat on up, right? So having something that they can buy in a portfolio in a Yoga form factor, which is in line with the certification from the vendors of their high-end specialty software, that lines this up with the rest of the professional workstation line. That was the rationale behind that.
Cool. Well, one of our chatters asks, would the P40 Yoga be powerful enough to do renders, and also what are your recommendations for doing things like CAD? Which laptop would you recommend? I mean, I guess you've got the 40, the 50, and the 70 for that.
Right.
And my take, but is that it seems like the performance options go up as the size goes up, so you can they all have quadro graphics, right? But the P70 has a higher grade of quadro graphics than the 50, and the 50 has higher than the 40, but you're also trading off some portability for that, right?
Right. And I'm fond of saying to friends and family and customers as well, it's all about trade-offs. Everybody wants, ideally, everybody wants, a sub $1,000 laptop with the highest end processor, the most graphics, and the most memory in the world. But the laws of physics conspire against our engineers, and there always have to be trade-offs to hit the right functionality points and the right price points. So if I'm not mistaken, the P40 has a Quadro M500M, which is not the highest end, right? If you look at the P50 and the P70, you know, we're up to like the Quadro 1000, 2000, 3000, 4000, even the 5000, if I'm not mistaken. And don't quote me on that, it's just my memory of what's up to the P70. And they're bigger and hotter solutions that require a thicker system with much more cooling capability. So to answer the question, I am not an expert in CAD packages, but the P40, there is a list somewhere on our website, I don't have it at hand, of the different ISV software packages on which it is certified. So I'd encourage anybody to take a look at that. But for a general level of CAD use for renders within the confines of the power of that processor and that chip, it is a certified workstation. Now, if you know for a fact that your requirements as an individual or for your business are at the higher end of what mobile workstations can do, obviously that's what the P50 and the P70 are for. So it's just the classic trade-off of thickness, weight, and price versus capabilities. But it's kind of a continuum of the scale there, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Great. Well, let's look at some more of our questions here. I have the P40 in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
Someone is asking about this is a common question. I don't know if we really have an answer, but folks are asking about the ThinkPad Retro that was rumored on one of your blogs, I think, by
David Hill. Yep.
David Hill. Yeah. Is it ever coming out? Is there any information?
I absolutely figured that we would get that question. You know, the last time I talked to the team about it recently, it's very much still in the planning phases. And I think what people have to bear in mind is that we absolutely understand the demand for it. And as badly as people out there want it, there are probably as many of us internally who want one just as badly. There are challenges. They're having to go back and figure out how to redesign some of the older type components to fit in modern chassis. And I'll be perfectly blunt. You know, it's something that is just taking cycles very willingly, but the team is having to work on it as an ancillary process to all the other stuff that we just absolutely have to get done. So it's still absolutely in the planning phases. The team is looking at it. They're talking to suppliers. They're taking feedback. But I guess I would just encourage people to keep, in the forums, keep letting us know that you want it. I know David ran a very large series of feedback and surveys about all the things. That data has been collated. He's talked about that on his blog post. So it's something that's still in the works. We don't yet honestly have a date or anything final in terms of design to release to anyone yet, but the work continues.
Well, that's really fascinating to hear, because I, for one, would be really curious to see it. I mean, thinking back to some of the ThinkPads we've reviewed, I mean, one reason why we're doing this is to talk really quickly about us. At laptopmag.com, we review like hundreds of notebooks a year. I myself have been doing it now for almost 9 years, and we've gone through dozens of ThinkPads. So we've really gotten a taste for what things are like today versus were like 5, 6, and 7 years ago. And there's been a lot of interesting changes going on. There were also a lot of really cool things about the old ones that I understand why people miss. What was your favorite ThinkPad?
That's
to pick something from before today.
Good question. The answer and I'm not being flippant about this. The answer I give a lot of the time is the next one, the one that's about to come out, is my favorite. But I've used a lot of them. I have been with the IBM and Lenovo PC divisions now just past my 19th service date anniversary back in April. So I'm trying to remember. I think the very first one I used was some variant of the 755, which I have a fond memory of. But I think one of the most notable and interesting ones is probably one that people haven't seen, or that many people haven't seen. For a brief period of time back in 2000-ish, maybe, I used a ThinkPad 235, which was a Japan-only model that, and it was tiny. It was like a sub 10-inch screen. It might have been a 9-inch screen, but it ran off of two Sony standard camcorder batteries, one that went in either side, and it had 3 PCMCIA slots, which was key if you worked at IBM at the time, because I could keep a modem card, an Ethernet card, and a token ring card in it all at the same time, and not have to swap them out between Ethernet at home and token ring at work.
Wow. Obviously I haven't gotten to use all the rare models, which would have been cool. I obviously, of things I've reviewed, I love the X300, X301. Really, I think a lot of people did. While never the most powerful laptop, I think the ergonomics of it was just perfect. Like 13 seems like the Goldilocks zone to me anyway, in terms of a laptop screen size. 12.5 and 14 are pretty okay too, but with that laptop, it really sort of hit fit right on my lap. And then the one thing that we haven't seen a lot of since, but I'll throw in my vote for the retro edition, is having soft touch on the palm rest, which really made typing like having a gel rest like I do on my desktop. Speaking of 13s, I have over here, and we've gotten a lot of interest in this since we put up our review last week and even before that, a ThinkPad 13. And this is really a new line for this year, because we haven't seen a 13-inch ThinkPad in a while, and there's really no direct predecessor to this. So what can you tell us what the thinking was in terms of designing and developing this laptop?
Right. So the expressed desire or need, if that's the right way to put it for this, actually came out of, I believe, studies that we did around the education market. So I think most people, and you certainly are aware of our 11E series, which was specifically designed with the needs of school, right, with like K through 12, but actually more specifically younger school ages. So it was a little bit thicker, a little bit heavier, but it was reinforced specifically for schools. So as I mentioned before, and I will get to something more specifically about the 13, is that the sheer amount of engineering and requirements, modeling that go into all the ThinkPads is extraordinarily extensive. As I said, we sell something on the close order north of 12, 13, maybe even 14 million of these a year. I'm not sure. So even if, as many of them as we do make, they cover a broad range. But this one sort of started from the ground up with the needs, most specifically of higher grade school students, like high school to entry university level requirements. So it doesn't have things like the traditional bottom docking or some of the higher end enterprise requirements enabled on it. So we were able to make something that was pretty sleek, thin, and specifically targeted at a certain screen size. So and the decision was made to break it out as a separate series because T series all have something in common, X1 series all have something in common, and this kind of needed to stand alone as a product that represented really, really good functionality for really good value, kind of in a standalone series, because we'd never done anything exactly like it before, and it didn't fit clearly into the classic mold of a T or an X or a P or an L. So that's kind of how it came about.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is one of the best laptops we've reviewed this whole year, and frankly, one of the best ThinkPads. It's obviously a really great value, because for a starting price right now of $611 here in the US, you get it with a 1080p display and an SSD. So those are things that normally you pay a lot more for, and you have something that's, you know, just over 3 pounds here, and is just the right size screen at 13 inches, and it's got a full array of ports, including, this is very noteworthy for a lot of folks, including myself. Oh, what we have over here, if we can see, maybe not so easily, a USB Type-C port.
Right.
One of the first on any ThinkPad. I think the only other one is on the ThinkPad X1 tablet, right?
Correct.
And while this isn't a Thunderbolt port, you can charge over it.
Yep.
It's not a Thunderbolt port, right? I think it's just
Correct.
standard USB 3, but you can charge over it and you can do video. So pretty neat, because you're future proofing. And yeah, you don't get the docking components on the docking, proprietary docking. But on the other hand, with USB-C becoming more popular and a lot of USB Type-C docks either out or on their way out, how important is it, even for corporate customers, do you think, to have the proprietary Lenovo dock? Do you see USB-C eventually replacing that on all the laptops?
Okay, I want to amend my earlier statement. I forgot the P50 and the P70 do also have USB Type-C, and those are Thunderbolt ports, but you can't charge the system in.
Right.
They do have power out for charging peripherals on the P50 and the P70 as well. So I'll give you the most, hopefully the most succinct distillation I can. Is yes, absolutely. USB-C is going to be and is already important. It's on people's minds, but our view was that there was just still too much uncertainty, because if you look at what can fit inside a logically fit inside a USB-C connector, you've got power in, power out. USB 3.0 can be carried. USB 3.1 can be carried. Thunderbolt can be part of it. And honestly, I can't remember off the top of my head if DisplayPort can exist independently of Thunderbolt, or if it's a subset of that. So it was, a pretty complicated thing, and we just wanted to be able to offer a completely consistent experience across the board with that, which is why we are rolling it out slowly. So yes, it's going to be something gaining in importance, and obviously can't talk about unannounced product, but this was a logical intercept point for it because it was a standalone series, and then of course it made total sense in the X1 tablet as well. And to answer your question about traditional docking, yes, because I think in the minds of a lot of enterprise folks, it still has the classic element of security. Right, you've got docks with locks that can be Kensington locked down to the desk, and then the docks have their own independent key, so people can click it down on their desks and lock it in. So we do honestly find a lot of large enterprise customers still have both functionality and security requirements for traditional docks.
Very, very interesting. So before we move on to some of the other questions, I just want to say, for those who are wondering, I find it very interesting that this actually uses, I think, a T-series type of keyboard. The keys are very deep. I think we got about 1.9 millimeters over 1.9 millimeters of travel on it, and it actually is one of the most responsive keyboards I've ever used. What kind of goes into the process of, if you can talk about, of picking out what type of keyboard to use on a model? I mean, obviously they're all ThinkPad keyboards, but the travel varies, and there's some other variances. How does that process take place? Because this is one of the least expensive ThinkPads, but it actually has the best key feel I think I've ever had on any laptop.
Okay, so everything that we'll discuss today, down to and including the X1 tablet, all have the same general design requirements from a ergonomic perspective. While the key travel does vary, the X1 tablet having the least, and things like the T series and the 13 having currently the most, the design process and the requirements process starts with looking at what is the classic force feedback curve for a ThinkPad keyboard. And this is something that I think almost everyone who uses a laptop intuitively feels when they type, but it's not something that they necessarily picture in mathematical or graphed terms in their head. But if you think about it, if the force of a keyboard were purely linear, and I'm lagging a little bit on the screen here, but if it went purely diagonal and the key required exactly as much force or exerted exactly as much force coming back up as it required to push it, then it would feel very mushy. It would feel very flat. So every ThinkPad keyboard has this signature S curve. So it requires slightly more pressure to depress, and then it gives, sort of not all of a sudden, but if you can see my hand, I'm not sure where we are on the lag on the video, but I'm making this sort of S curve with my hand. And then it goes into design, and I've been to the lab in Japan where they test this, and it's absolutely the most boring test you've ever seen. But there's a robotic arm with a force probe, force meter, that hovers over every key and takes a full 2 minutes to go all the way down and come all the way back up in the travel of the key, which is measuring to make sure that every key on every system, from keyboard to keyboard, system to system, generation to generation, has that same signature ThinkPad feel. Now, you've addressed the reality of the modern market, which is that as laptops get thinner and thinner, some keyboards have to have less travel. Obviously, something like the X1 tablet, the detachable keyboard for that, has less travel than something like a T series or a 13. But the engineering process and the requirements process that goes into making it feel like a ThinkPad keyboard does everything that we can to ensure that, again, from system to system, from generation to generation, that they all still feel like a ThinkPad.
Great. So one other thing we're getting questions about is removable batteries versus not removable batteries.
Right.
This year we saw that the T460S has a sealed-in battery, whereas the prior gen, the T450S,
right,
used the power bridge. Although you can still get the power bridge on the X260 and T460.
That's correct.
So what's the reaction been like to that? And I guess what's the rationale? Are you guys bullish on removable batteries? Do you kind of see them as better for some than others? What's your kind of position on removable batteries, and why not? Why were they taken out on the newer model, on the 460S?
It's a great question, and something I've gotten quite often. It's just simply a matter of the trade-off of every other requirement that we have around ThinkPads. Having a battery in a removable module, obviously there's extra plastic that goes around the battery. There's the connector, there's the latches. So they add thickness and weight. It's absolutely unavoidable. And the solution that we came up with, I believe, 1 or 2 generations ago, for having that power bridge battery in the currently, as you said, in the T460 and in the X260, I think was an elegant requirement, but it sort of pushed the limits of how thin we can possibly get it. Because if you're looking at the one that you have behind you there, which I assume is a T460,
Yep.
There's one internal battery, but then the cells in that external battery, again, have to be encased in an external casing. Then there's the latches and then the connector, and it just, to the limits of the way we engineer it, and believe me, we have hundreds of obsessive engineers who do this stuff for a living in labs in Japan. It was determined we couldn't get to the requirements of what the market wanted in the T460S, which was to get it down to 19 millimeters and 3 pounds. It just didn't work. So the battery life that we do get is obviously great, but it's not as flexible and extensible as the power bridge battery. But when you're talking about a requirement for thin and light versus a requirement for extra battery life, there's a trade-off there. It's kind of cut and dried.
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, just for folks who are wondering, I have both of them here right next to each other so you can see the difference. This is the 460 and this is the 460S. And, with the standard 3-cell battery in it, this is obviously quite a bit thicker. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you can see it's pretty big difference. I think we're talking about, maybe 2 3/10 of an inch, maybe more. The difference in weight is this is 3, and I believe with this battery it's either 3.7 or 3.8. So you're talking about a good chunk of a pound here, and then if you do what I would do and buy it with a 6-cell battery, then you're going maybe even a little bit above 4 pounds.
Yeah, it's about 4.1. You're right. It's 3 point. I was just looking at the specs here. It's 3.8 with the 3-cell battery, and 4.1 something with the 6-cell battery. Now that 6-cell battery gets you like close, I believe, if I'm remembering right off the top of my head, close to 20 hours, right? But 10 and a half roughly on the T460S. That's a full workday for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think obviously it depends on the use case of the person. It also depends somewhat on the configuration. I mean, we have a test that's heavily reliant on Wi-Fi that we do,
Mm-hmm.
and on the on the T460S we got about around with the non-touch screen. I believe we got around 8 hours
Mm-hmm.
of continuous. Our laptop mag test, for those who aren't familiar, involves continuous surfing over Wi-Fi. Right now at 100 nits of brightness, which isn't that extreme. And then on the T460, we got a kind of a similar battery life, although the version we tested was a touchscreen, so there's that. Similar battery life with the 3-cell, but when we stepped up to the 6-cell, we got over 13 hours of battery life.
Right.
So that makes it, on our test, one of the longest lasting laptops. And I think the only one that's significantly longer was the X260, which I believe we got about 17 hours of battery life with the extended battery. So you really, if you're willing, my 2 cents to people who are shopping for these things, if you're willing to go with a little bit more thickness and a little bit more weight, and some people aren't, but if you are, if you can take it, you can leave your charger at home, which can be really invaluable, because you never know where you're going to end up, where you might not have an outlet. But those are definitely some of the trade-offs that people have to make when shopping. What do you find is more popular with your enterprise customers these days? Are people more excited about the thinness or the battery life?
To be slightly flippant, yes. It goes back to the question of why do we make a lot of different models? There is no, in my experience, single thing that any given business customer is going to stick on, right? So we definitely have folks who adore the T460S because they like the price point. It meets their requirements for the hardware docking, and it gives them something to give to their salespeople and for their executives on the road. That's 3 pounds, right? So it's pretty common that we find when a corporate customer issues a request for proposal, an RFP, there'll be different classes of laptops that they're asking us to propose to them. Sometimes, some of that, usually a smaller number, will be the workstation laptops. Some will be mainstream for folks who just may only carry it home in their bag and back to the office the next day, who are not, road warriors or travel a lot. And then there'll be usually some sort of executive or sales focused model. And for a lot of people, the X1 Carbon is the right one for that. But then for another subset of them that need the differences that are in the T460S, that's what they'll go for. And I did want to make a comment that one thing that may not be evident to anybody who's purchasing unit of one for themselves is that in the corporate spec world, the way a lot of these get bought is, somebody may be thinking, well, they could have put in just a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that. But there are discontinuities in requirements, right? That sometimes, in many cases, there will be a spec issued that said, laptop, blah, 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 requirements must be 3 pounds or less. And you simply don't get an opportunity to introduce that model to a customer if it's 3.1 pounds. So that's why, you'll see from us and from everybody else, some that hit some very nice round numbers, because that's the way corporate buying requirements work in many cases. And that's why there is, the difference between the T460 and the T460S.
Makes a lot of sense. So I've gotten a couple of questions about accessories, specifically about two different things: the ThinkPad stack and WiGig docking.
Yep.
So I guess the question about the stack is, I don't know what there is really to say about it, but is that something that you guys see as successful? Is that getting a lot of traction in the marketplace? Do you think we're going to see more Think accessories, or corporate customers really want to, even if they have to pay a premium, something that is sort of Think branded and Think styled like that?
Yeah, I don't have sales numbers, but I think it's a success. Obviously, that's something we introduced at CES 2 years ago. It's sold throughout the year, continues to be sold, and we announced 2 new additions to that, the projector and the wireless charging plate. So yeah, it's obviously something we continue to look at, what makes sense to expand. And yeah, the feedback from customers on that has been great, right? It's something they very much like, the idea of an expandable ecosystems of things that are all specifically made and tested to interoperate with one another and with the ThinkPads. And then you look at things like the new X1 mouse. I think we had some great X1 headphones as well. So it's not always just the function, right? Sometimes it's style, right? Some people don't care, but some absolutely do, that the things that they buy need to match their main system. If you look at the ultra thin ThinkPad X1 mouse, I use one of those at my desk. It's really cool. I carry it on the road. I flip it over, use it as a presenter. So yeah, that's absolutely something that continues to be part of our roadmap, are accessories that are specifically designed to interoperate with ThinkPads, that are tested, that stylistically match them. And then WiGig, yeah, absolutely. That was something that we've got WiGig enabled on many, not all, but many ThinkPads this generation. We've got a monitor that is natively WiGig, and yeah, it works. It's sort of the classic promise of true full bandwidth wireless docking. And the feedback that I've personally heard on it is that while it takes customers a while to roll things out and adapt their work environments to accommodate something like WiGig docking versus traditional docking, there are some logistics concerns, and they have to educate people and teach them how to use it. But I've seen personally a large degree of interest and excitement from customers about it.
So this comes up sometimes. So let me show a picture here. Here I have 5 ThinkPads, and they're all black, and they're all various shades of black.
Yeah.
With the exception of the 13, ThinkPad has been mostly. I think there have been a couple of exceptions over the years. Has mostly been black. That is something that seems to be somewhat of a I wouldn't say somewhat of a polarizing thing, where I meet people who love the ThinkPad black because it's tradition, and then I meet other people who say oh man, when are they going to change that? So I guess I don't know if it's more of a question, but what motivated you guys to go with silver on the 13, and you know why why has everything continued to be black? And is it more about the tradition or maintaining the brand?
Sure. I guess I'll address the last part of that question first with the silver. I'm trying to remember when we first ever made the first non-black ThinkPad. There were some ThinkPads sold in Japan only, I believe, back in the late 90s that were gray. Partially for cultural reasons. They thought in the consumer market that gray played a little bit better than black. So it's not always been an absolutely invariable tradition, but it has definitely been our specifically decided trade dress. So if you go back to like the Z60 or the Z61, there was I believe a titanium covered model around one of the Olympic editions, and we had the leather covered ThinkPad Reserve edition. So there's been some variation over time, and we understand, it's sometimes something that customers want. Some of the education models have been available in red. Some of the original ThinkPad Edge series was available in red. So I think if you look at the history of the line, we've always taken customers who, in 2006, the Z series, we've always taken the feedback from customers, and where it makes sense and where there's the demand for it, we're willing to introduce other colors on occasion. But I'll paraphrase, if not directly quote David Hill here, that ThinkPad models are always going to be based around black. And that is just a conscious decision. We are into our almost our 24th year of making ThinkPads. The first one was black. I think many of you who've ever seen me at an event, you've probably heard me talk about the story of the original ThinkPad being based around the design of a Japanese bento box. And it's simply because what we've always wanted the product line to be is something that visibly evolves from one generation to another, right? We've never been in the ThinkPad line about having, the fashion color of the spring release and the fashion color of the fall release. We don't do magenta in one season and bone in the next. It's just a ThinkPad has always been black. It's, to be flippant, it's the black tuxedo or the little black dress of the business laptop world. It's part of the identity of ThinkPad. So yes, you'll see silver on occasion. You've seen red in the past. We'll continue to do that from time to time, but the base color for ThinkPad, its fundamental identity has just always been black.
Let's talk a little bit about another fundamental aspect of the ThinkPad identity. One which I've definitely gone on record as saying more people should embrace, which is the TrackPoint.
Yep.
We've seen a couple of things over the years, like education models that didn't have it, but it's managed to stick around. Do you have any sense of how many people are using it? Is it getting less popular because of some of the more multi-touch touchpads? Or are you still seeing really strong support for it with your customers?
Yeah, the answer to your last question is yes. There's still very much strong support. And I won't name any names here, but there are other people in the industry who still make products with pointing sticks, very much, we think, emulating us. And you're right, it's been there since the very first ThinkPad. We changed the texture, obviously, from the classic, I forget what even our official name for it. We just, people always call it the cat tongue, the original one, to this newer one, which is called the soft dome. But it's, if anything, I think what we see now is more of a hybridized model, because you have folks such as myself and many other both internal people and some of our insiders group and fan club groups and customers that I talk to who would never use anything other than a TrackPoint. But now with the advent, post Windows 8, really, I guess, of things like multi-touch gestures on touchpads, I don't personally use a touchpad for anything, but I do find myself sort of switching back and forth between the TrackPoint and the touchscreen. And I know that people who come to ThinkPad from having used other products may only be used to a touchpad. And it does have its uses, right? Like I said, I think multi-finger gestures and the ability to scroll with 2 fingers and set gesture shortcuts for opening certain applications is very useful to some people. But for me personally, and I think this echoes our original design intent, is we wanted something where you could keep your hands in the home row position and exert absolutely almost imperceptible, but certainly very minimal force on a pointing device without ever having to lift your hand from the home row and to be able to position the mouse anywhere you want it. And I think what, for people who haven't ever used it or aren't used to using it, they're used to a more one-to-one correspondence of the location of their finger on a touchpad, of being able to drag it back and forth. What I would say is that certainly works, but it interrupts my personal workflow. I'm more or less a touch typist. I'm not perfect. And for me, having to lift my hand up off a keyboard and make multiple motions on a trackpad to move my mouse from side to side doesn't work nearly as well for me as using a TrackPoint. So yes, legions of fans out there, both internal and external. And for me, it's absolutely a fundamental part of the TrackPoint, of the ThinkPad design. They have that red dot in the middle of the keyboard.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something. I mean, that's good to hear, because I mean, yeah, I totally, not to editorialize, but I'm an editor here. I do really advise our readers, that if they do buy a business notebook with a pointing stick, and I think it's pretty well agreed upon by everyone that the best pointing stick around is the TrackPoint, that you're really able to make the person faster. And we can keep making computers faster and faster, but your computer can only go, even the fastest computer can only go as fast as you do. So if I have to keep doing this, moving my hand, then I'm slowing myself down. And those milliseconds, those milliseconds add up into minutes, and those minutes add up into hours. And if at the end of your life is flashing before your eyes, how many times do you want to see this?
Yeah. Yeah. I did want to add one more thing. We talked earlier about some of the little stories and tidbits that I get from talking to the team who actually engineer these things. And every time I go to Japan and talk to them, they come up with something else that, at the very least, I just look at it and go, wow, that took a lot of thought and a lot of time. So if I know some of the folks out there are definitely the kind of people who take apart their ThinkPads and look and see what's inside. But if you never have, on traditional ThinkPad keyboards, what you'll see on the bottom is there's a little bump, a little housing for the mechanism of the TrackPoint. And as we've made ThinkPads thinner and thinner and thinner over time, the team has really had to do a lot of work to miniaturize the componentry underneath the TrackPoint that makes it work. And on some of the very thinnest models, I thought they came up with something very interesting. The circuit board, the componentry that actually handles the input from the TrackPoint, had traditionally been more or less square and fit directly up under the TrackPoint. But as they needed to make it thinner and thinner, they realized that they had to move it, but it still has to be part of the keyboard mechanism. It can't be moved off onto the rest of the system, because the whole ThinkPad mechanism needs to be repairable and removable. So they came up with a very smart idea. They did a re-layout on the control board on the PCB that controls the TrackPoint, and instead of having it be square, they essentially split it in half and laid it end to end so that it was long and skinny, and tucked it up under the space bar so that we could make the keyboard thinner but still keep all the classic functionality of the TrackPoint.
Wow, that's a fascinating story. So we see, obviously, I have in front of me here a X1 Yoga. We see more and more yoga products
Right.
in the ThinkPad line,
Mm-hmm.
but we still see a fair number. We still see a lot of clamshell devices. How do you advise customers in terms of, well, do I want a 2-in-1, or do I want a traditional laptop?
Okay, I'll throw out I haven't indulged in a whole lot of like geeky industry specs, but what we've seen in various studies of usage models in the market, if you look at the totality of portable devices, tablets are a small but considerable part of the market. But if you look at traditional clamshell laptops versus two-in-ones like the X1 tablet and convertibles like the Yoga series, the total number in the market, the preference in the market for two-in-ones and convertibles taken together is now about roughly equal to the traditional clamshell market. So roughly half and half in the market, at least as people's expressed desires, between traditional clamshell and two-in-ones and convertibles. So again, I kind of go back to when I talk to customers or even friends who are interested in these, I try to get down to what is their fundamental use case? What do they want to do? Because if you've got somebody who is really oriented around pen and tablet and only occasionally wants to use a keyboard, then a two-in-one is probably the right answer for them. Something like an X1 tablet. If they don't care about ever using a pen or using the thing in tablet mode and just want a fundamentally classic clamshell experience, but with the occasional ability to zoom pictures and scroll and respond to on-screen prompts with a quick tap on the screen, then a touch screen clamshell is obviously the thing for them. But if they are willing to accept something that is by necessity a little heavier than a two-in-one or a tablet, but they still want full hold it in their hand and use a pen on it type functionality, then that's what the Yoga is for. And it's essentially why we still make 3 different form factors of laptops, is because there is no one correct usage style. It's up to individual choice and individual need. For me personally, I am more oriented around a clamshell with a touchscreen. I like having a touchscreen. Your point about the battery life conceded, but that's what works best for me. But then again, I do also have an X1 tablet, and I find myself playing with that a lot more and using it more around the house when I'm just watching videos and not doing like actual productive business work. So I'm somewhere in the middle. Maybe I will end up with a Yoga. I don't know, but that's currently where I'm at, and that's why we make them, is because we've got a kind of continuum of needs among both business customers and individual customers.
That makes sense. I mean, we've seen really just since the original Yoga came out, just a slew of laptops across the entire industry using the Yoga style design. So obviously it's very popular to have something that is a laptop first and a sort of tablet second, but also allows you to do other things. I mean, I know that at least in the consumer line, there was some information gathering about what mode people are using. In the business world, are people primarily using them as tablet slash laptop, or are they using the presentation intent modes a lot for things like presentations?
I don't have any hard and fast numbers. I know that various studies have been done in the industry. My sense and the feedback I've gotten from both the internal team and from customers is that absolutely the tablet and the laptop, the traditional laptop modes, are the 2 most used. Your tent mode and your stand mode obviously appeal to people in times like using it on an airplane, or when you just need to kind of flip it over and use it in a meeting and show presentations. But just time-wise, of the total utility time of the laptop as it's used by most users, I'd say certainly laptop and the tablet modes are the 2 most common. And I'll make a little bit of a shameless plug, which I've avoided up to this point. The lift and lock keyboard was, I think, one of the coolest technological things that the team came out with on the original Yoga, which obviously we still have in the current Yoga and the X1 Yoga, because the engineering of the art and the science of engineering laptops isn't just about solving, a voltage, getting voltage and a signal from here to there. It's really about building something that actually meets the express needs of what the user, or the feedback that comes from the user. So the very first generation of the Yogas, people didn't care for that feeling of having the keys press under their hand when it was flipped around backwards. So that's why the team came up with that lift and lock, so that the bezel lifts up and locks the keys in place when it's in tablet mode.
Yeah, so for those who, I'll just demonstrate that right now for those who haven't seen it. So here you have the keyboard, and the keys are totally, you're getting your full travel and everything. And then as I flip it around, the keys become, it's maybe a little hard to see on camera, completely flat. I can't press them at all. And what's going on there, right, is that the keys haven't gone down. The base is lifted up, right? Correct?
Correct. And there are small hooks underneath each key in that bezel. So when the bezel rises up, it pulls flush with the bottom of the keycaps and locks them in place so they can't be depressed.
Yeah, I mean, no question that when I think we tested the original Yogas, it wasn't a real serious problem because these keys were disabled anyway when you have it in tablet mode, but it felt weird to be holding it in the back like this and be pushing down keys. So now, so with lift and lock, which has been in place for a few generations now, right? It definitely solves that problem, and that's something that we haven't really seen anywhere else. So it's little innovations like that that really are interesting and exciting when you follow the lineup over time.
Yeah, that's, I think if you were to ask the engineers, and I do, that's some of their favorite problems to solve, right? Getting proper signal quality from point A to point B inside of a laptop, that's just something they have to do every day. But when they get a new, and certainly for them and for me as well, exciting engineering challenge, like how do you solve the problem of feeling the keyboard when the thing is in tablet mode, and they come up with something that works as well and is as visually cool as a lift and lock keyboard, I think that's the stuff they geek on. That's their favorite part of their job, I think.
Yeah, it's definitely fascinating when we get these in and we get to see those types of changes. Well, we're coming up on our hour, and I just wanted to really thank you for giving us your time and answering these questions. Obviously, we still have the Reddit going on for a few more hours, and there'll be folks in there, and we'll be in there from Laptop Mag, and you guys will be in there from Lenovo for a few more hours on the ThinkPad subreddit. Obviously, if you want to learn more about these products, Lenovo.com has them all for sale, and we have reviews of most of them if you go to laptopmag.com. And really, I think everyone is just really excited to answer your questions and learn more.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll make a slightly, again, shameless plug for a subset of the Lenovo site. We've got a micro site called thisistinkpad.com, all one word, where some of the engineering background and some of the videos from the lab testing. So if anybody wants to kind of look through a series of videos and vignettes and articles about these engineering things, and I've got a series of ThinkPad history videos where I interview some of the engineers who designed ThinkPads all the way back to the original 700C. So it's just sort of a site for the fans that where we talk about the history and the engineering and the innovations of ThinkPad. I encourage everybody to check that out. Thisistinkpad.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kevin. It was great having you, and hope to talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you so much. Anytime. Take care.